They told me I ruined the family name. But I wasn't the one who committed the crime. I was the one who exposed it, and that's why they erased me. I still remember the night it all began. My 21st birthday, a small dinner at home in Portland. Candlelight, roast chicken, my father's favorite jazz in the background. Everyone smiled. Until I opened the gift from my sister. It wasn't a necklace. It was a flash drive. She smiled, just slightly, and whispered, "You might want to see this before Dad does." It wasn't a warning. It was a setup. By the time I saw what was on it, I knew my life was over in that house. A private video, taken without my consent. Uploaded. Shared. Spread. I later found out it was recorded at a college party. Someone I trusted had set up a hidden camera. But no one seemed to care how it happened. They just saw the headline and treated me like I wrote it. But it wasn't the video that broke me. It was the silence. My father, a decorated judge, said I had brought shame to his legacy. My mother left a duffel bag on the porch. No words, no warmth, just shame. And my sister, the one who gave me the video, watched me leave and locked the door behind me. For a while, I thought maybe I had deserved it. Until the cold nights on Greyhound buses turned into months of working double shifts in Denver. Until I started reading immigration law in a shared apartment with broken windows. Until I realized I hadn't destroyed the family name. I had just refused to stay silent. 18 years later, the courtroom was silent when I walked in. And someone gasped, "Is that Judge Natalie Griffin?" Every head turned. Even hers. My sister. The same one who once shut the door. Now the one on trial. And me? I didn't come to save her. I came to witness. Before I take you all the way back to where this began, can I ask you something simple? Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? Every time I see those answers, it reminds me I'm not just talking to the past. This story may have started in silence. But knowing you're here, that changes everything. When I walked out of that house, I told myself it was temporary. That maybe they'd come to their senses. Maybe someone would call. Maybe my mother would text, even if just one word. But no one did. I spent the first night in my car. Well, technically it wasn't even mine. It belonged to a friend of a friend who said I could crash in the back seat. The second night, I parked behind a laundromat off Hawthorne. And by the third, I was in a shelter downtown. I used a fake last name when I signed in. I wasn't scared of being found. I was scared of being recognized and forgotten all over again. You'd be surprised how fast you learn to disappear. I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, took a pair of dull kitchen scissors, and watched pieces of my old self fall into the sink. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything. Just stillness. They had taken my name, my voice, my family, but they couldn't take my will. And so I started building again. Quietly. One job turned into two. One contact turned into a connection. And one night at the clinic changed everything. There was a commotion in the waiting area. A young woman, barely 20, holding a toddler, sobbing in Spanish. Two officers stood over her with paperwork and cold eyes. "Ma'am, sign the form. You're being processed." She didn't speak. Or maybe she did, just not in English. Everyone froze. I don't know what came over me, but I stepped forward. "She's not signing that." The officer looked me up and down. "Who the hell are you?" I lifted the form, glanced at the dates, and lied. "These papers are expired. Your database is out of sync. If you submit this, it'll get thrown out." He hesitated. I didn't blink. He backed off. The woman collapsed into a chair, her daughter clinging to her neck. She whispered, "Gracias." That moment right there was the first time I remembered what power felt like. Not control, not revenge, but protection. A few days later, I got called into an office I'd never been in before. A man in a brown blazer sat across from me. "You've got guts," he said. And judgment. His name was Anthony Morales. He ran a nonprofit called Pathlight Denver. "Come work with us," he said. "Not as a cleaner." And, just like that, the girl they called a disgrace became something else entirely. They didn't put me on a podium. There was no office, no welcome packet, no shiny badge. At Pathlight, I started at the lowest rung again. Filing, photocopying, driving across town to drop off forms no one else wanted to handle. But I was listening, always listening, to the way Anthony talked to donors, to how caseworkers explained trauma without using the word victim, to how the system bent and twisted when it wanted to, and how it crushed the people who couldn't speak its language. So I studied. At night, after my shift at the cafe, I took free legal webinars. On weekends, I sat in the back of City Hall meetings, scribbling notes in shorthand. When no one needed the office printer, I used it to copy articles on immigration law and precedent cases. One day, I asked Anthony, "Can I help rewrite the intake process? It's scaring people away." He raised an eyebrow, then handed me a stack of blank forms. "Show me," he said. That week, I rewrote every welcome script, translated them into 3 languages, and color-coded the priority levels. By Monday, they implemented it. No applause, no pat on the back, just a quiet nod. That was enough. 2 months later, a local journalist showed up to do a story on the clinic. Anthony pointed toward me and said, "She's the one you should talk to." I panicked. I said no. I told him I wasn't ready. The truth? I didn't want my name out there. Not the old one. Not the new one either. Because somewhere in Oregon, the Griffin family still existed. Still respectable. Still polished. A mother from Honduras came into our office one rainy Thursday. 3 kids. No shoes. She carried a thick folder of court letters she didn't understand. I spent an hour translating everything. When I told her what they meant, that her court date was missed, that a deportation order was already active, she broke down. She held my hand and said, "I tried to ask for help before. And I did something terrifying. I submitted an application for a city council internship under my real name, Natalie Griffin. No aliases. No initials. Just me." 2 weeks later, I was accepted. It didn't make headlines. But to me, it felt like the earth shifted. I saw people arguing over budgets, policies, things that decided who got help and who got ignored. I didn't say a word at first. But I listened. I learned. And slowly, they started listening back. By the time I turned 30, I had already lived a dozen lives. Barista, cleaner, legal assistant, translator, survivor. But now, people started calling me something else. Policy writer, advocate, counsel whisperer. It happened slowly. I'd walk into a meeting and someone would say, "Ask Natalie, she knows how this works on the ground." It shouldn't have meant so much. But after being erased, every word that acknowledged I existed felt like an ember lighting back up. Still, I kept my head down. No press. No interviews. When the Chronicle wanted to feature me in their Faces of Reform column, I declined. "I'm not the face of anything," I told them. But that wasn't true. I just didn't want them to see it. The Griffins. The ones who still held holiday dinners in that polished house in Portland. Until the day my name showed up in an unexpected place. A nomination list. For a state-level advisory board on immigration equity. My name, Natalie Griffin, printed on letterhead. I hadn't applied. Anthony had. Without telling me. I thought maybe, he said. It was time they started listening to the right people. I froze. I knew what this meant. Once I stepped into that role, there was no hiding. No more shadows. No more aliases. I stayed up all night, staring at my reflection in the window of my apartment. Would they see me? Would they recognize my name? Would they try to drag it through the dirt again? But something shifted in me. I was no longer afraid of being seen. I was afraid of never being used. Not in the way they had used me. but in the way purpose asks to be used fully. So I said yes. The first meeting was at the state capitol in Denver. I wore a gray blazer, pulled my hair back, and sat 3 chairs down from a man who once argued on national TV that children of immigrants shouldn't be allowed to attend public school. When it was my turn to speak, my voice didn't shake. I told the story of a family who spent 3 winters in a car because no landlord would rent to undocumented parents. I ended with a sentence I hadn't planned. You don't have to believe what I believe, but you do have to care who gets hurt by what you pass. The room went still, and later that night, my inbox flooded. Not with hate mail, with messages from people who finally saw someone in the room who spoke like them. That's when a journalist emailed me again. This time, not for a column, but a profile piece. Front page. I didn't respond, but they ran it anyway, with a photo someone had snapped of me testifying. And the headline: The Silent Reformer, Natalie Griffin's Fight for Those Without a Mic. And no one behind me. I woke up with one thought. I wasn't going for her. I was going for that girl. So I booked a one-way flight to Portland. No press. No aides. Just me, a black coat, and a seat in the back of the courtroom. The morning air was sharp, but my footsteps were steady. The courthouse doors opened with a hiss, and the chill inside was colder than the November wind. Reporters clustered outside. Flashes went off. I kept my sunglasses on. Inside, I sat in the last row, uninvited, unnoticed, until the judge walked in. Her name was Justice Renee Holloway, one of the few black women on the bench in Oregon. I'd watched her lectures online for years. Never thought I'd sit in her courtroom. She scanned the gallery like all judges do, then stopped, squinted. "Wait," she said, voice carrying across the hushed room. "Is that Natalie Griffin?" A ripple shot through the courtroom. Heads turned. Cameras twisted. Whispers flew. Emily's body stiffened. She turned. Eyes locked on mine, and for the first time, her face cracked. The woman who once handed my humiliation to our father like a gift was now trembling under the same spotlight she used to bask in. Our mother sat next to her, pale and rigid, hands clasped around a rosary she never prayed for me. And my father? Stone-faced in the second row, as if trying to determine whether the ghost of his forgotten daughter had truly come back. In power. I didn't wave, didn't nod, didn't blink. I was there to witness, not to save, not to forgive, not to speak, just to exist. The judge recovered quickly. "Proceed," she said. But the room never settled. Not after that. Every time a document rustled, someone glanced back. Nothing dramatic. Just 3 words. "Come for dinner." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood exactly what it meant. Dinner wasn't about food. And then came the real reason for the dinner. My mother leaned in. Her voice trembled with practiced sorrow. "We were thinking, maybe you could speak to the federal prosecutor. Not formally. Just help family." There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. Just a request wrapped in guilt. I put down my fork. The sound echoed like a gavel. "If I weren't Judge Natalie Griffin," I asked quietly, "would I still be your daughter?" Silence. No one answered. Because the truth was already in the air. Heavy, sour, undeniable. I stood up. The new leather on the chair squeaked. But it couldn't hold me anymore. "I kept your name," I said. "But I built my life without you in it." My mother's voice cracked. "Natalie, please." But I was already walking away. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just peace. For the first time. A screenshot. Old emails. Private photos. A clip of me crying outside a shelter year 1. Then another. Then 10 more. I didn't panic. I didn't run. Years passed. I thought I could stay in the background forever. But purpose has a way of pulling you forward. 5 years after that first testimony, I led a statewide housing reform initiative. It wasn't glamorous, just late nights, public forums, and policy drafts no one wanted to touch. When I finally ran for office, I didn't expect to win. But people weren't voting for polish. They were voting for proof. And proof, I had plenty. At 9 a.m., my chief of staff walked into my office, pale-faced. "Governor, there's a smear campaign brewing." I looked at the images again. Past pain reassembled as fresh threat. And I felt nothing, because I knew who sent them. And I knew what they were afraid of. A woman who survived the fire and came out carrying water. I didn't call them out. I didn't release a statement. I didn't post a single tweet. Instead, I walked into the press room wearing white. No flag behind me. No notes in hand. Just my name, and the weight it no longer carried. The cameras clicked like warning shots. Reporters leaned forward, already forming headlines. I spoke softly. We all know how power works. Sometimes it comes in the form of law. Other times, it whispers through dinner invitations, old voicemails, and photos you never knew still existed. The room was still. This isn't about revenge. This is about prevention. And then I introduced it. The Witness Protection Integrity Bill. A piece of legislation that would criminalize the use of personal history, especially from family members or former partners, to manipulate, intimidate, or silence public officials and whistleblowers. It wasn't just political. It was personal. But I didn't name names. I didn't have to. By nightfall, the bill had gone viral. Not because it was flashy, but because people recognized themselves in it. The ones who had been called crazy or too emotional, just for telling the truth too close to home. Editorials praised it. Advocacy groups backed it. And the opposition? They went quiet. Even my family. No calls. No texts. Not this time. And honestly, it felt clean. Weeks passed. Snow came early to Denver that year. One evening, I spoke at a town hall, 40 chairs, metal folding kind. No cameras. No headlines. Just people. A woman in her 60s raised her hand. She asked, "What if one day your family truly changes? Would you go back?" I smiled. "I don't hate them," I said. "I just stopped waiting to be seen. If they change, I'll let them tell their story. But I've already told mine. And I'm not rewriting it." The room was quiet. That kind of quiet where truth settles like dust. Undeniable. And then I saw him. Standing in the back. No badge. No suit. Just an old man with gray eyes and folded arms. My father. He waited until everyone had left. Walked toward the mic. Paused. His voice was lower than I remembered. Like it was carrying something heavy for the first time. I used to think silence was strength. That if we didn't talk about it, it couldn't shame us. He looked at me, eyes unreadable. But now I know. Silence is what nearly destroyed us. He opened his mouth again. Maybe to explain, maybe to justify. But I gently raised a hand. Kids chased each other across the frozen street. Laughter echoed, clear, clean. I stepped out into the winter air. Didn't look back. Didn't wave. Just walked forward, steady, free. Because sometimes, the loudest way to reclaim your voice is to use it for someone else. And sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is build something beautiful where something painful once lived. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Or what part hit closest to home. We carry these stories together. Not because we're broken, but because we finally chose not to stay silent. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.